Um, Welcome everyone to our first event of our three-part series on design and systems thinking. I'm very excited to be part of the team of facilitators who will guide you through this exciting journey and exploring how the two approaches could be integrated to encompass organizational design. My name is Linda Kuvea, and I'm part of the SI Cape Town Hub, together with Boitu, who's going to be facilitating the event today, Asen, who's our hub lead, and Sheldon and Shao, who are not with us today. As we all know, we have teams within organizations whose purpose is to ensure that the employee experience is inclusive and outlined in different ways. And from the mission statement and job descriptions that draw talent to apply for vacancies, to human resources operating as observers of employee engagement, performance management, and compensation to benefits, just to name a few of the functions. So today's session is really focusing on discussing introductory aspects of how design thinking works in shaping employee experiences, and how it is used to impact and create tangible change within teams and organizations. We will have a second session, which will focus on a case study, looking at how this works within teams in a more practical way, and some of the trends, some of the insights and actionable items that people make within a system. And the concluding and final session of this learning series, we'll have some guest speakers who will talk to us about the linkages between design thinking and systemic design, and see how the two actually come together to solve complex societal problems and formulate strategies. So moving on to today's business, this is going to be a very interactive session, so feel free, the chat box is open, and I will be picking up conversations from there. And we'll also be using the Miro board to capture some of your responses and to take you through the session today on how systems in design influence teams, individuals, and environments. Then just to speak about a little bit of housekeeping, if you have any burning questions, like I mentioned, please drop them in the chat and we'll make some time available for comments and questions. And I'll also be moderating the chat. If you aren't saying anything, please just mute yourself because the session is going to be recorded. Thank you for joining us tonight. For those of us who are in this part of the world, and afternoon and morning from everywhere else, without wasting so much time, let me hand over to Boitu to take us through the first session of our learning series, and he will speak about some key concepts on design thinking. Boitu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you to all of you for actually making the time to join us this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, or even late evening or early evening, we say. Today, like Linda has mentioned, we're focusing on the crossover between systems and design thinking. I myself, I'm a project and program manager for design thinking or an organizational design org. So this is a bit of what I do, but also integrating with some of the work that the SI Hub does here in Cape Town, along with other hubs as well. So to take you through our quick agenda for the day. So we'll do a quick check-in exercise. That's a common practice in the design thinking field to make sure that we are arriving with good intentions, but also you'll start thinking about more about what the session may be focused on, but also what may be asked of you. As Linda mentioned, it is an interactive session. So some of your insights will be captured in the board. So the tool that we're actually using is a software called Miro. You're basically using digital sticky notes to not only capture insights, but also display images or maybe some context for some of the exercises that we'll be going through. As Linda has also spoken about, this is a learning series, 3 parts, this being the first one. I'll take you through what is called a human systems canvas and some of the questions that that we ask ourselves around not only how systems functions, but how people in those systems function. I'll take you through an iceberg company culture model, which looks at patterns, mental models, or events, and other aspects in which systems and designs basically integrate one another, just not only from a learning perspective, but also from programming, but also from coaching, or maybe other aspects in which they work. We'll do some definition work, not only your understanding of design thinking, but other aspects as well. Take you through what is known as Tuckman's model of teamwork, looking at not only the different stages, but the characteristics of those stages as well. And then we'll look at outlining the problem. Maybe some questions that will be asked of you is, how would you define accountability, or how would you define responsibility? Those terms are often interchangeable for some people, or they perceive them as interchangeable. And then in closing, I'll take you through some of the crossovers between the two frameworks. So what is systems thinking? How does system thinking inform us compared to how does design thinking inform us? So please remember, share your messages in the chat, or raise your hand and Linda will make me aware, and then I'll get to your questions or inquiries. So as a check-in question, just to kick us off, who is someone you admire on your team and why? That is our check-in question for the day.
Did you drop the link to the?
I think we should drop the link.
Yes, I should drop the link.
No, they'll leave it in the chat. They can type it in the chat and it will populate on the board.
Okay. Are we giving names of people?
That's Joss, sir. And what's your reason, Joss? And Yasmin as well, you can share a little bit why in the text as well. So please drop your responses in the chat and then I'll populate the board for you. Okay, so some of the responses, I'll read them out to you. So Sophie, creativity and grit, which is an incredible attribute to have in a team environment. My director, she's a great leader, inspiring and innovative, which is amazing as well. Course mates, they come with growth mindset every day, incredible. Mentor and team leaders to start with, but I understand the important, unique contributions of team members. And then Ariel, he always brings a positive attitude. And then Linda, the director of program, and she's good at troubleshooting. I need you to start thinking about how most of these responses have nothing to do with KPIs or metrics or measurables. So you're thinking about the people that you're working with and how they impact you and the work environment that you find yourself in. So those are ways in which that not only design thinking moves you forward, but it starts showing you the type of environments that you operate in and how those move you forward, not only from a deliverable standpoint, but the impact that it has on you in that particular environment. Thank you guys for sharing. So just to talk you guys through this human systems canvas, you don't necessarily have to know what the images are saying, and this can be found on the SI Hub websites as well. This is what we look at when it comes to human-centered work integrating with system-centered work. So from a paradigm perspective, we're asking ourselves, what are the mental models and underlying values, which will be displayed in the iceberg model just below this? When we're looking at people in the environment, what do we observe the person doing in that team environment? It may be a leader or an individual. What do we hear the person saying? What is the person thinking? What is the person feeling? What are the events that we observe in the system? And what trends have been happening over time? And what are the trends can we identify? So ways in which people work inform us about what are innovative ways that could be developed in order to move people forward, not only from an individual level, but from a team perspective as well. So looking at the company iceberg model. So from an event standpoint, we're looking at the office environment, how people show up from a dress code perspective, the people that they interact with, maybe the location that somebody has to travel to, and the amenities that they interact with on a daily basis. From a patterns perspective, when in the work environment, you're looking at people's sense of safety, the trust that they have established with those that they work with, a sense of purpose that they may feel, maybe expectations from their manager or team leader, and maybe the initial vision statement that they interacted with when applying for that vacancy. Structures, looking at results, discipline, biases that they may come across, some core values that they may identify with, the mission statements again, and their understanding or their perceptions of personal space within that environment. And then lastly, looking at mental models, some of the tangible differences that they see not only from themselves as an individual, but the teams that they work with, the level of openness that they experience in the work environment itself, the flexibility that they find within their individual capacity and teams, the level of enjoyment, which is why people show up the way that they show up, a sense of authority or empowerment that they experience, and the overall narrative of their day-to-day as well. So this is my next question to the group. What is your understanding about design thinking? Whether it's from a definition standpoint or something that you've read, what is your understanding of design thinking? Please drop that in the chat as well. So for some of you that have just recently joined, we're asking everybody on the call, what is their understanding or your understanding of design thinking? And you can drop your response in the chat. Are there any other responses besides the ones that have been shared on the board so far? Okay, there we go. I'm really appreciating how people are understanding it from different perspectives as well. And it's something that we'll go into a little bit further as well. So just reading some of the responses that you've sent. A methodology to innovate and solve a problem, which is great. We often use how might we questions when it comes to not only defining the problem, but also ideating around which problem we're trying to solve. Intentionality in each step, user-focused on process that prioritizes trying and making, prototyping and testing. Human-centered design, considering the end-user impact. Yes, that's true. Keeping the customer at the center. Yep. People often wonder why, when they leave in grocery stores, do they start picking snacks in the aisles? And that's also intentional design that you don't even think about. A problem-solving mindset that entails empathizing with users and doing quick iterations. That is true. Problem-solving through understanding of the problem, guided by empathy, creativity, and usability. Yeah, these are great definitions of design thinking, and I'll just use this definition to talk you through what that looks like. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is a non-linear iterative process that teams use to understand users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, and create innovative solutions to prototype and test, involving 5 phases: empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. It is most useful to tackle problems that are ill-defined or unknown. And I'll talk about the different ways in which this has been used, not only for teams, but for organizations as well. So from a process flow standpoint, this is what it looks like. So starting with empathy, defining the problem itself, ideating around the problem that you're trying to solve for, prototyping ideas, and then testing those out. So what or how can design thinking be used to change organizations? Just from the definition and what people have shared, you can share this in the chat as well. How can design thinking be used to change organizations? And I'll show you the iceberg model just to jog your memory as well around what that looks like from a company culture standpoint. So most of the responses that have been shared are applicable to the design process itself. Let's say, for instance, I'll give you an example of a recent program that we've completed around using design thinking or systems thinking frameworks. This is where we're getting a team to find better alignments, and that has a lot to do with how people understand the vision of the units that they're working in. Most often we hear of how managers may delegate work without necessarily giving the context in which somebody is accountable for executing work. A shared vision is something that needs to be established very early, and failure should be something that is encompassed, but it's not necessarily discouraged. We often talk about how teams are not necessarily given the capacity to fail forward in order to make iterative changes to not only product development, but changing company culture, finding better best practices for team alignment, or maybe ways in which that they feel like they show up in the workplace itself. So how do we create a more inclusive and cohesive environment? Those are some of the ways in which design thinking can change organizations. So from a system standpoint, these are some of the themes that we come across when doing design work and integrating them with systems. So some of the 6 themes from systems thinking and organizational design, we have the interconnectedness aspect. So dynamic relationships between various departments, whether it's you and your manager or somebody from a different part of the organization that is considered your stakeholder. From a synthesis standpoint, this is the process of obtaining expected synergies between parts of the company. So how do you ensure that you have your part of the project or the deliverable taken care of in order to move the team forward? Emergence in the workplace, this often takes the form of the push and pull that happens due to organizational politics and competing priorities. So how do you consistently prioritize in your workspace? Is it a matter of like work that has been delegated to you? Or do you have OKRs and KPIs that you're accountable to, that you have to deliver on? But then do your priorities change if your manager asks you to do something more urgent? So that's how you start to think of emergence within a team space and how that not only influences the meetings that you attend from a value adding standpoint, but also how you prioritize your day. Do you feel like you can redesign your day, or does your work determine how you show up consistently? Feedback loops. Balancing and reinforcing feedback loops within an organization serves as guidance to make adjustments as we learn more. I know some people have had the experience of having to wait for feedback, whether it's from a deliverable that you're looking at particularly, or you are taking over from somebody who may be on vacation or leave. So how do you create more consistent feedback loops within teams, which has a lot to do with how we communicate with one another? Often in teams, we find how people can talk past each other, but not realizing that there's ways in which, or a framework that can be developed that allows people to talk to one another. Am I an active listener? Am I asking incisive questions? What are some of the assumptions that I interact with on a daily basis? So it's almost like from the industry blindness that you can adopt from working in a certain team or organization over an extended period of time. How do I find better ways or new ways to communicate with the people that I interact with on a consistent basis? And how do I actually ensure my engagement consistently? So from a causality standpoint, the flow of influence between many interconnected parts within a system. So the principle that everything has a cause, whether it's engagement or disengagement. And then systems mapping, identify and visually map out the many interrelated elements of a complex system. Some people, when they think of an organizational map, you think of an org chart. You think of reporting lines, you think of service lines, you think of how you inform your team and how your team forms a bigger part of the picture. So that's ways in which, or themes that we interact with when it comes to organizational design and how systems thinking informs that. So just looking at some of the themes that have been mentioned, what is a theme or gap you recognize from your team or organization? So it could be around gaps in communication, gaps in getting stuff done in a timely manner, maybe dealing with different aspects of micromanagement, or ways in which the vision statement does not match with the actual work environment itself. So what are some themes or gaps that you recognize from your organization? Please feel free to drop that in the chat as well. Some of the themes mentioned are what I'll actually be touching on when it comes to prioritizing goals, because everything feels urgent. And that's often referred to as firefighting in team environments. Requisite variety in the team or to respond to a variety. Yep, that can make you feel scattered. Psychological safety issues, to speak up or to not. That's an incredible theme that I've also come across consistently. Feedback falling on deaf ears, or there not being channels for giving feedback and hearing back. So what most of you are referencing in this aspect is called the shifting of burden or addicted to heroics. And it's an addiction archetype, or like a systems archetype that we come across, not only in systems thinking, but how that's integrated into the design workshops that we run. So as you see in this model, you're mostly looking at the problem symptom. There are various factors that go into what you see as not only how you identify the problem, but the possible solutions that you may need to consider. So there are external interventions, which we'll go into. You'll see what the model looks like when it's going through different iterations that may attempt to solve the problem. Dependence on external intervention, constantly being in a reactive environment and not necessarily having time to think, not having time to be proactive in your planning and scheduling. And then an internal solution, where often the solutions lie. We often hear about consultancies being brought in to not only solve the problems of teams that may be attempting to resolve conflicts or maybe adopt new ways to be innovative, but they don't realize that most of their solutions lie with the team that they're trying to take through this process itself. So, organizational addictions. In organizational settings, addiction can take the form of a dependence on certain policies, procedures, departments, or individuals. The way we think about problems or the policies that we pursue can become addictions when we use them without consideration or choice as an automatic knee-jerk response to a particular situation. So from an example standpoint that some of you mentioned, there's ways in which people become hooked on heroics in this sense. So we're looking at the crisis at the middle here, and then the heroic starts. How do we reward somebody who gets it done the quickest? But that may compromise the quality of work that you get. The dependence on the heroics creates a sense of accomplishment. Getting it done first, that doesn't mean you've done it in the right way or at the right time. So how do we recognize people who are producing high quality work within a timely manner? Or how do you even establish a timeline that makes sure that you are delivering high quality work in a timely manner? We look at other components as well, expediting. Who else can we bring in to resolve this issue? And then we're looking at the attention to the system itself. A lot of it has to do with giving the people in that particular environment the capacity and the ability to make the changes, whether it's redesigning their calendars, being able to escalate accordingly to the managers, because we know how people in micromanaged environments almost are paralyzed without that influence. So in order to make sure that you feel like you're doing the right work, you need to double check with somebody else, which means that you have been limited in some capacity to deliver. So how do we break this insidious cycle? So what it says here, the insidious side effect of crisis management is that over time, as crisis management becomes our operating norm, managers become dependent on the use of heroics, the need to have recognition and a feeling of accomplishment in an otherwise paralyzing institution. I think an analogy that's important to use in this instance is something that was made reference to in our previous learning series. It was a picture of an elephant with people touching different parts of the elephant. And all these people are blind men. So you have different interpretations of what the problem might be, but because you're not given the capacity or you don't have a forum in order to address the problem, you're all identifying different problems within your own complex system, not realizing that having the forum to discuss it as a team is what often moves you forward. They may bring in an external consultancy to try and help you get to that point, but how do you design a program that empowers people to feel like, I can actually redesign my calendar? We often hear people complaining about work-life balance, but how do you help people redesign their work-life balance to encompass, when I get home, this is my chance to switch off and interact with my loved ones? Because that often limits how people see themselves, not only when work starts, but when it stops. And for some people, they may feel like it never stops. So from the model or team development aspects, these are the different stages in which teams can find themselves. So from a forming stage, teams basically outline the mission, and we're looking for a shared agreement within that team environment in order to make sure that everybody feels included. And we're creating not only a cohesive, but an inclusive environment. So it looks for agreement on team roles, rules, guidelines for decision-making. We often come across people who understand what was listed in their job description when they first started, but now they're realizing that they may be completing somebody else's work. How do we get people to redesign their way back to that initial job description that allows them to not only execute from a point of full capacity, where they're energized and inspired, or maybe even challenged in the right ways to complete their work, instead of constantly feeling like work is happening to them and not for them. So as we get to storming, we're looking at how team leaders should be facilitating discussions, ensuring a common understanding of agreements as well. From a norming perspective, we're looking at how team leaders should be encouraging the norming process, supporting and coaching people through these processes, and celebrating successes. As a coach, we often teach people the skill of asking incisive questions. So instead of imparting knowledge, which is more of a mentorship approach, as a coach, how do you ask questions that will allow somebody to not only see themselves in the system, but see ways in which they can make a difference themselves? So what we often use is called the GROW model. So what is the goal that you're trying to achieve? What are the realities of that goal that you're trying to achieve? What options do you have in order to make this goal tangible or achievable? So thinking about the actionable items that people can take, small bets that move people forward. And then what is the way forward? Often that requires you to create a feedback loop so they can give you an update on what has been achieved or what has moved them forward, or maybe some of the impediments that they've encountered. And then lastly, looking at the performing, which encourages high performance, facilitates communication, and celebrates success. So I'm glad that some of you mentioned some of these when it comes to themes that we interact with or see within different teams. So, constant firefighting, addicted to heroics, balancing feedback, what are the motivators within the team, managing expectations, how do you not only communicate early, but you communicate often, performance management, and not just from a performance review standpoint, but some people are motivated by either a bonus or maybe some time off. But how do we ensure that there's process documentation in place so that even when you're not there, somebody's still able to execute on your deliverables? How can we pivot? This has often impeded teams from not only making internal changes when it comes to a team culture, but it has also limited how they perceive their level of empowerment within that team environment as well. And then another theme is, how do we help them establish a common understanding? A discussion that I was having with Austin earlier around some of these themes was around the use of language, which he made me aware of. So when it comes to the balancing feedback, the initial sticky that I had to do with negative and positive feedback and how language influences how we perceive that. Negative feedback does not necessarily correlate with doing bad. It may be a challenge or a minor impediment, but it doesn't necessarily restrict you from ideating and prototyping a new approach. It just gives you the ability to react differently to maybe similar circumstances. So things that we think about in different aspects and how they inform how teams not only establish a common understanding, but also form policies that inform their teams as well. So as we get here, please feel free to drop in the chat how you would define accountability. As I mentioned at the beginning, some people use accountability and responsibility interchangeably, but we want to sort of like outline the difference between the two. How do you define accountability? And while we're there, how would you define responsibility as well? Being in charge of something. Interesting. So how else would you, there we go. So some of the responses that we've received, how you define accountability, taking ownership, which is great, to adhere to the team charter and goals, not deviating for the main purpose. There is a standard that comes with accountability. Responsible for activities, accountable for outcomes. That is true. There's a strategic approach that you take to accountability. And then how you define responsibility, being in charge of something. Maybe we could get more detail around that. Accountability is goal-oriented. Responsibility is task-oriented. I like that definition. The commitment to work towards the achievement of a shared goal. Thank you so much. So these are the ways in which accountability and responsibility differ from one another. Accountability means being answerable for one's actions and results, while responsibility is the act of taking ownership of a task or project. Ownership has been mentioned, actions and results. Accountability implies that an individual is held to a certain standard, which we have referenced in one of the definitions shared. Responsibility implies that an individual is accountable for certain actions. That is true. Accountability requires proactive steps to ensure success, while responsibility involves taking on the task with the expectation of success. And I hope this also helps you think about maybe a task that you've been made accountable for or responsible for in some capacity. And how do you define between the two? Is the standard set and upheld by you, or are you in charge of the deliverables themselves? So think about ways in which you can distinguish the difference between the two. I think something that I wanted to ensure that is a part of the last thing that I share along with this display between the crossover between the two systems is it's a small quote from a book that I read. It's called Time to Think. And it says, thinking for yourself is not a popular activity, though it should be. Every step of real progress in our society has come from it. But in most circles, particularly in places that shape our lives, schools, workplaces, thinking for yourself is regarded as suspicious. This has often limited how people show up in the workplace and how they see the ways in which they can redesign their work days. So from a systems thinking standpoint, we're looking at name variables. We're looking at how the system sets boundaries and how to determine leverage points. From a design thinking standpoint, we're often looking at how do we tell the story? How do we map the journey from when the person arrives to when the person leaves that environment? How do we sketch the trends in something that is more attainable and tangible for those teams and those environments? And how do we allow people to share personal experiences? There's often a negative connotation that comes with being vulnerable in the workspace. But I think often in cases, we don't realize that people will actually extend us the grace that we may need when having a hard day, or maybe when giving feedback that you're not necessarily comfortable with. How do you have a courageous conversation through being an active listener? Somebody who's purposeful and intentional about the wording that they use, or maybe the imagery that they may use, depending on how you're applying design thinking. And then when looking at how these two come together, we are able to identify themes. We're able to make the system visible, brainstorming many solutions, prototyping promising solutions for the people that work in those environments. And then we experiment to test these solutions. And Linda earlier mentioned how this looks like the perfect formula for system innovation. And that's what I believe design thinking and system thinking does when used in an integrated manner, not only to change teams, but to change organizations themselves. So yeah, that's mostly it from me today. And we can take the rest of the time to not only answer any questions, but to also interact as well. And please, if you don't feel like unmuting yourself or turning on your camera, please feel free to share your opinions in the chat. So yeah, back to you, Linda.
Thank you very much, Poetry, for such an informative session. You really took us through the concepts in a easy to digest manner, if I can put it like that. Thank you so much. Yeah, So like Boyton mentioned, please, if you have any questions, do drop them in the chat, and then we can work on responding on them. I'm just gonna read some of the questions here. To me, asked, or she says, oh, so like a child can be responsible for causing a fire, but the nanny is accountable for it. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a very good way to put it to me. Yeah. And then there's a question on what, yeah, I think they're coming a lot. I'm just going to try and go back a bit and see.
Okay.
Yeah. What is the significance of differentiating between accountability and responsibility?
So an example that I can use is, let's say, from a recent project that we are currently running, you have an engineer and you have a supervisor. The supervisor reports to the engineer from a reporting line standpoint. The engineer is accountable for what that section has to deliver. They know the standard that is expected of that section, but then they have to be able to let the supervisor know what constraints will they experience, what resources do they have available to them, and then from a delivery or an execution standpoint, what are they responsible for? So this requires an iterative process of not only providing feedback, so that creates a sense of responsibility for the supervisors to let the engineer know what impediments they are encountering, but ways in which that they found solutions that can move them forward. One thing that people don't know is that engineers have not always been foremen or supervisors in any capacity. They are engineers in not only theory, but also in practice as well. So they are dependent on somebody who has taken that responsibility to hold them accountable as well in that capacity. So I hope that distinguishes the difference between the two, not only from a standard standpoint, but from an execution standpoint.
Thanks, thanks, Boy. To me, do you feel answered? Krishan, you said you like the last statement that Boy made about using systems thinking and design thinking together, that they actually lead to the systems innovation we are looking for. Thank you for that comment. I also made that comment earlier on today. Yeah, because thinking about how systems thinking, the concepts around systems thinking and the concepts of design thinking and bringing them together, it actually brings us the innovation that we are looking to change the system. So yeah, bringing us to systems innovation. I also feel the same, Krishan. I agree with you. Are there any links to reference that you used for this presentation? Boitu, would you like to share? Maybe if you can't share now, you can share maybe through the platform or the LinkedIn page.
Yes.
Yeah, Asen, you have your hand up. Asen?
Yeah, thanks, Linda, and thanks, Boitu, for the brilliant presentation. I was just following up on the question. I think it's Michael who put it. He put the question in the group, or I think it was a comment earlier on when Boitu was presenting, where he asked if he said that we are missing a key element, who is in the room. I just wanted to know whether it was in a comment that was making based on the particular point that Boitu was talking about, or it was in relation to the discussion that, like the whole discussion that we are having now. Michael.
Thanks, Arsene. The point was really about the Tuckman model and the inevitability of that form, storm, norm, perform. I think one of the issues is that we don't really have a common language to understand each individual and what they bring. Not only in terms of their skills or their structures or their responsibilities or their accountabilities, but who they are. And in informing from my team, certainly, understanding that individual in terms of their knowing and their being and their doing creates a language of communication around the value that each individual brings to the team. And therefore, this kind of process by which a collision is necessary in order to norm, and sometimes there is a bad norming as well as a good norming. So the presumption that after this collision, there's the air is cleared and everybody is happy. That is not always the case. There are many organizations and teams that I've worked with, and other people presumably also too, that have normed around a bad norm. So I think, to some extent, the model is simplistic in assuming that there is always a transition to performing. And my contention is that by starting the process, by understanding the individual and their value, their uniqueness, their strengths, and particularly the way that they do differently. So some people are inclined to start solving problems or take decisions in a very different way from other people. Some people need the facts, some people don't need the facts. And the tension between those two things, for example, is a creative possibility, not necessarily, room for dissent or room for argument. But if you don't have that common language by which you understand the individual and what they bring, irrespective of their gender or their ethnicity or all of those kind of parameters, but the essence of the person, and that's where teams start from, in my opinion, in terms of the shared purpose or shared objective, and let's say a division of responsibilities or a negotiation of contributions towards a team. That is the language that we need to start from, not from functional, not from processes, not from responsibilities, not from hierarchy, not from let's say an imagined purpose, but a purpose for a team within a unit that is connected to a purpose for an organization. So the frame starts not from a structure or a hierarchy or a process or an intent or an infrastructure. It starts from a commitment or a connection between the purpose of an organization, or whatever that might be, an organization, a business, a company, or a team. Okay. When I have that shared commitment based on the value and the uniqueness and the strengths of each individual using a shared language, then I have the basis for performance. So that's my conversation. I don't agree that the Tuckman model is particularly helpful, that process is inevitable, and that the outcome in terms of performance is necessarily always the case.
Yeah, and I would agree with the points that you have made, especially around the importance of how leadership buy-in is important to this process of adopting new ways of working. Not only establishing new policies or governance, but also establishing new cultural practices within a team. Often the integration of a program or process is impeded by the leadership team if they haven't bought in or are not necessarily practicing what they are asking the team to adopt. That often limits.
Well, I would be a little bit more radical than that. I would say with that shared language and with the shared purpose in the context of a sign up or a commitment to the organization's purpose, the question mark is who is managing what. So I'm looking for more autonomy, more agency in that team in determining and making decisions of itself. It is not an entity that needs to be managed and controlled. And those times are gone. And therefore, the true empowerment of the team, the signal of that is the agency that the team has to make decisions without reference to being controlled or mandated or accepted or allowed. And therefore, the question is not on the team, the question is on leadership. What is leadership? And what is the role of a manager, and how should a manager perform? My personal opinion is that a manager is a service. A manager, the word manager, we delete the word manager. Okay, teams do not need to be managed, they need to be enabled, they need to be facilitated, they need to be guided, they need to be supported, they need to be augmented, they do not need to be managed. So I think, to some extent, I'm feeling that the conversation is very, industrial era. It is very, let's say, receptive. It is very accepting of a particular modality of behavior and managing and leading. They lead, we follow. I say we all lead. We all lead each other. We all lead each other together. And it is the autonomy and the agency which is what's needed in modern day society. Particular perspective. That's my personal view on this.
Yeah, and I would agree.
Thanks.
Empowering teams is an essential part of actually moving them forward. If people feel empowered within their own capacity, they're able to make tangible changes that a manager may not necessarily see. So that's how we design programming that actually allows teams to make those tangible changes, whether it's like small experiments or making small bets that actually moves them forward, because often solutions lie with the team and not necessarily the manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also that goes back to the conversation around accountability and responsibility. And how do you think about it, and what does it mean to you based on the vision that you want to drive as an organization? How do you bring that together? How do you facilitate an environment where the skills that you have and the people that you have, like putting all that together, can be able to work, for the benefit of driving without necessarily, as Michael is saying, without necessarily having people to guide them from a top-down approach.
Yeah, we do have more questions. I also had some comments on what Michael was talking about. It's a very interesting conversation, but I think we might have to pick it up outside this platform. I've actually asked Yasmin to help me with picking up the rest of the questions. We have our SI Cape Town Hub platform, and we can continue the discussion there as we also prepare for our second session. And so I would really like to thank you all once again for making time to join us for this session today. And I'm really sorry that we have to close it because of time, but this was a very, very interesting conversation. And I hope that this session helped us to take stock of some of the perceived challenges that we as individuals face as part of teams and what we prioritize. And maybe we also got an opportunity to see some of the indications of how these challenges affect the systems that we are part of and that we are trying to change or influence. And maybe we were also able to look at creating adaptive programming that allows us to build towards targeted experiments and exercises, and getting teams to think of themselves as drivers of systems and not just participants. So like I mentioned in the beginning, our second session will be focused on a case study, looking at how the crossover between design and system thinking works within teams, and some of the trends, the insights, and the actionable items that people make within a system. So details of when this will take place will be shared on our platform and our LinkedIn page. So please look out for the announcement. Once again, thank you so much, Boitu, and the rest of the SI Cape Town team, and all the participants who came today to join us in this very interactive and insightful session. Thank you all. And we hope to see you again for the second session.
Yeah. Thank you all for making the time.
Yeah, before we go, there's a question there, a question that says that can the Cape Town Hub act as regional hub? Yeah, we are actually open. Right now we operate as the very first African hub, but also one of the strongest hubs in the network, in the Systems Innovation Network. So feel free to join us, connect with us, and we can schedule a meetup session and discuss and explore possibilities for you to be able to participate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. See you again next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.